Good morning, Michael.
Good morning, Jenny White.
How are you today?
Good.
Everything okay?
Yeah, so far.
Well, yeah, that's true. It's only 9:03.
Yeah.
So things can get much worse.
Yeah. Here, I got a little memento that I might.
What is...
So every time I agree, I'll just take a sip. Yeah, I'll say that's what she said.
I hope people haven't seen The Office and know what that reference goes to.
That's my kids.
That makes me giggle. I've got a couple of kids who buy me things like that too. And usually they're things that you don't want to put on, on a broadcast. So I was at the Lion's Den in Edmond last night talking about dark money. And my gosh, you have to hand it to Rhonda Peterson.
Yeah.
Because I remember when she started the Lion's Den and she did it in her own house. She'd put up card tables. They'd have a little dinner. It was like 13 people. I swear there were like 100 people there last night.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think, people out there, that one person can't do anything, then you haven't met Rhonda Peterson. And by the way, you're using way too many excuses, because she has really, I've seen so many people over the 15 years that I've been involved in activism, if you want to call it that, in Oklahoma, and they're really excited and they jump in with both feet and then they're done. It's like after 6 months or even a year, you never see them again. And I'm telling you, Rhonda Peterson is not that person. She just doesn't give up. And it just, honestly, it does really frustrate me almost to the point of tears, even, that she lost her House district race. And because I don't even believe she did. I just don't. And you can call me an election denier or say what I was telling somebody last night, there's only one thing I like about aging, and that is I just don't care anymore. So I don't care what you think about me. I just don't care what you say. I just don't care. But the thing of it is, Rhonda won the actual machine vote hands down. There was no way around that. And just like so many other elections in Edmond, she lost it on the absentee ballot count. And you did the same thing.
I did. Brian Shellum did. Margaret Best did. It's just kind of a recurring theme in Edmond. You have these magical absentee ballots that come in just enough. There's always just enough to hammer you.
I'm just not okay with that. And I mentioned that last night on the talk. I've heard so many people say, well, we need to start doing what the Democrats do. We'll just, we'll do the absentee ballot thing. No. Yeah. Because then what ends up happening is now you have even more absentee ballots that you're trying to keep track of. That's just not a viable option. And when people say that, I'm like, no. What we need to do is roll back the absentee ballot thing to the way it was, when we were kids. I mean, you literally had to be on your deathbed or missing limbs to not hike it to the voting poll.
Yeah, not get an automatic ballot every single time just because you checked a box.
I mean, this is just so bad.
Yeah,
it's so bad, and it has to stop. And I will say this, I believe it was Nathan Dahm who ran the bill this year to roll back the absentee ballot so that you had to have an affidavit saying you just literally couldn't physically make it to the poll to get an absentee ballot. And that's where we need to go, but that brings up another topic too. I don't know if you've seen have you been following the Dusty Devers?
Not close enough.
Well, so basically Nathan Dahm and Dusty Devers decided to filibuster a vote the other day just to, poke our Senate leadership in the eye. And then basically Treat called them terrorists and that he wouldn't give in to the demands of terrorists. Now, this is what I'm talking about authoritarianism and where we are today in this whole government is completely out of control, and we elect these people and they don't care one whit about us because they're only responding to the special interests that put the money in to get them elected. And you can tell this is true because if Nathan Dahm and Dusty Devers had called Treat a terrorist or said that his actions they wouldn't respond to him as a terrorist, what do you think would have happened? The whole world would have come to an end.
Yeah.
It just would have been press conference every 15 seconds. I mean, this is just nonsense. But on the flip side of that, and this is sad to say, but I see that whole thing is very disingenuous because this is Treat's last year. He's not going to be able to affect their committee assignments, nothing like that. So they don't have anything to lose by doing this. They should have been doing this from the beginning when he was denying people committee and throwing people off of committees if they didn't do the way he wanted them to do, which is well known. And they should have done that back then. But no, they're not doing anything like that. They didn't want to do that back then. So I just find it very disingenuous. It's kind of like too much, too little, too late.
Yeah.
We got to have more chutzpah. We got to start attacking these things as we see them and literally, attacking back. What they did was great, but that should have been done 4 years ago.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of that old adage, what you do when no one's looking, that's really, the true person that you are.
I think that's actually pretty much a deal. And I will say this, I did meet, there are 3 candidates that are running for Treat seat. And I don't live in Treat seat, but my mom's house is in Treat's district. And so I do have a little bit of an interest in it. And there are 3 Republicans so far running for the seat. Aaron Curry, I'm trying to think of what her name is. Another lady that's been involved in the Republican Party, and this guy, Kelly Hines. Yeah. And he spoke at the Lion's Den last night. Have you met him?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
I was pretty impressed.
Yeah. He came to our precinct meeting and did a little 3 or 4 minute speech at our precinct meeting.
Well, I was pretty impressed. So I think maybe we should have him on.
Yeah.
Mr. Kelly Hines.
Yeah.
He's
got some pretty impressive credentials.
Well, and that's kind of what I was thinking. This guy isn't a nobody. Yeah. I mean, he's been in the military and was a under general. What's that one? He wasn't a general, but he was anyway. Sorry, Kelly, if you're watching, that's embarrassing. And my husband was in the Army, so I should know these things, and yet I don't. But I definitely think we need to have him on to visit with us about, himself and what he's doing, that kind of stuff. So Well, but let's talk about our guest this morning. We have a guest on this morning. Ken Malloy is, I'm not sure if we're supposed to say this or not, but I'm going to mention it. His wife is our friend Maria Seidler, and they are both attorneys. And I'm going to bring Ken on and hope that his audio is synced. Are you synced, Ken? Can you hear us?
I hope so. Can you hear me?
Uh-oh. Yeah. Yes. Okay. There we go. Okay. Now we're working. Awesome.
Can you not hear me?
No, we can hear you now.
Yeah.
We can hear you now. Now we're all good. So I was just talking about, I hope it's okay that we mentioned that your wife is Maria Seidler, our friend, who is also an attorney.
Yep.
What were you? Yep. You actually had a whole career. Do what? We're behind.
Yeah, they're still.
We're both delinquents.
Oh, you said they're both delinquents.
Oh, that's good. We're a couple of delinquents too, so you're in good company. So you were an attorney. So why don't you tell us what kind of law you practice? Because it's pretty interesting. What kind of law did you practice?
Actually, I'm less of an attorney than I am an economist. And so when I went to the federal government in the Reagan administration out of a law professor position that I had, I worked at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. But what really interested me was the policy, not so much the technical legal work. So I went up to join the policy office from the general counsel's office. And then from that point forward, worked for the next 12 years to deregulate natural gas at the wellhead. Wow. And that required a major restructuring of regulation of pipelines. And so that was my claim to fame. After we finished that in 1992, believe it or not, I even stayed on for the first Clinton administration to work on electricity issues. Similarly, trying to figure out how you promote competition within an industry that had been heavily regulated as a monopoly for decades.
Yeah.
That's my expertise.
That's pretty interesting stuff. So awesome. What got you interested in education?
Well, clearly, Maria's establishment of legal overwatch for parents' school rights and watching what she was doing there and seeing some of the warts and pimples in the administration of our schools. And then we moved to Tulsa out of East Coast positions in 2017 to be near our grandchildren. So we're part of our grandchildren's lives and all the trials and tribulations of getting them educated. And as a consequence, we've witnessed through our grandchildren virtually every form of education available in K through 12, homeschooling, Christian schooling, public schooling, online schooling. And it just occurred to me that Oklahoma, if it was to progress to a sort of higher on the feeding chain of states, it was going to have to significantly improve its K through 12 education.
Well, we're 49th or 50th now.
Well, I have here a document that I put together that has 7 different rankings: 45th, 49th, 44th, 44th, 47, 50, and 50. So no matter how you cut it, Oklahoma is a failure from a K through 12 ranking of states within the U.S. And you have to, I call it the triple whammy. You have to also look at the fact that the United States no longer is in the top 10. In fact, it's not even in the top 20 of OECD countries in terms of K through 12 education. So you couple the country, the state, and now you look at where I live in my backyard, Tulsa, it's at the bottom of any ranking of school districts in Oklahoma. And so you got the triple whammy. A failed country, a failed state, and a failed school district. It does not augur well for the future of either Tulsa or the kids in Tulsa because of that triple whammy.
Wow.
I think Jenny freezed up.
Is Jenny?
Yep.
Oh.
Jenny did.
She's
unfreezed now, but who knows what's going when it. I live in the boondocks, and so when it rains, who knows what happens out here. So hopefully it won't happen again. So I missed a few seconds because I was frozen, but I could hear the audio. I just missed the last few seconds there. But I think the thing that I'm most concerned with is, or I want to really talk about is, you're one of those kind of magical people who see a problem, and instead of just throwing your shoe at the TV or, screaming about it at your neighbor, you said, wait a second, I think maybe I can do something here. So I want to know a little bit. I want you to talk a little bit about NorthStar and how that came about and why you did that and that kind of thing.
Sure. At the end of my career that I just described in government, I started my own think tank in Washington, D.C. that focused on energy competition. And luckily for NorthStar, I made every conceivable mistake in running a think tank. So I came to NorthStar with a lot of positive experience. I raised a couple $1 million for my think tank in Washington over the course of 5 or 6 years. And then, like I said, I made plenty of mistakes. So eventually we closed it down. But as I came to Oklahoma and looked at education, what struck me when I did the research was that there is no, I believe I'm correct in this, no think tank in Oklahoma that focuses exclusively on K through 12 education in Oklahoma. You have OCPA, which focuses broadly and pays maybe 5% of its time on K through 12 education. You certainly have lots of people who want to keep K through 12 education being teacher focused rather than student focused. So you have strong unions, you've got strong school board association, you've got tons of contractors that make a lot of money off of school systems by selling them a variety of products.
Yes, we do.
But you don't really have a strong student oriented focus. And so a group of us started to meet more than a year ago now. It was February of 2023. 3 of us started meeting at a bakery on Wednesday and Friday mornings, and that grew to 4. And then that was me, Paul Hassink, former candidate for state rep, a professor from ORU, and then we added Jared Buswell, who had been a candidate for Tulsa School Board, and then we added a physicist who had retired from New Jersey. He was on the school board in New Jersey, so we added him to the group, and then we had a guy down your way, Charles DeFuria, who was a 30-plus year IRS agent who had been on the Luther School Board and was a treasurer. We then added a mom with a bunch of kids in the school system. We added another retired woman, Pam Gordon. So little by little, we built a pretty strong organization. And early on, we decided we needed a 501c3 that would focus exclusively on K through 12 education from the perspective, and I want to emphasize this, from the perspective of competency. We're not involved in culture war issues. We're leaving that to other organizations. We exclusively focus on what can we do to raise the proficiency level of students in the Tulsa Public Schools. To do that, we created a sister organization called the TPS Rescue Coalition. That's headed up by former Attorney General oh my God,
O'Connor.
I just forgot his name.
O'Connor.
O'Connor. Thank you, John O'Connor. And we have some other luminaries as the board of reference for that organization. That organization put out a report card. A voter guide on the 3 candidates for Tulsa School Board. Early on, when we were putting NorthStar together, we realized we're in a really unique situation. Rarely, if ever, do you get 3 school board members up at the same time on a 7-member school board. And the reason for that was it's often that 2 of them come up, but we had a resignation and then an appointment. So that person had to stand for election. So we got 3 school board members up for election, and the school board historically has been split 4-3 in favor of the status quo. And in my view, the status quo is failure. And 3 members in favor of trying to shake things up a little bit and promote reform and a different view as to what the role of the school board was, but they were consistently voted down. So the fact that we have 3 members up simultaneously means if we win all 3 seats, we'll have a 5-2 majority in favor of reform. And if we win 2 of the 3, we'll have a 4-3 majority in favor of reform. So TPS Rescue Coalition focused primarily on finding 3 candidates. We put out a 5,000 mailer invitation for people to declare that they would be interested in a candidacy. We then recruited 3 excellent candidates, my wife being one of them, Teresa Pena being another, and then Candy Washington being the third. And they were all taking on what Maria fondly calls the GIST machine. And the GIST machine are the 3 candidates who will have joined themselves at the hip, and they will vote with Stacey Woolley consistently in favor of failure at the Tulsa Public Schools. But the think tank part of it is more analytical than it is political. So we're going to exist far beyond this election. We put out about a week ago the first edition, what I call the Tulsa County edition of the Rep Index, which you'll hear a lot more about over the years, because we intend to keep hammering away at the fact that Tulsa school districts need dramatic improvement in order to increase the Oklahoma standing among state rankings. And in the REP Index, which stands for Responsible Educational Progress Index, we looked at 11 characteristics over 4 years. We have data from the OSDE, the Oklahoma State Department of Education. We have 11 characteristics over 4 years, and we looked at 13 jurisdictions. So just do the math of how many criteria we were looking at in order to come up with our rep index score, and then you can turn the score into a ranking. And no matter how much we played with trying to give the benefit of the doubt to Tulsa, and there are 2 categories in which they deserve the benefit of the doubt, they spend more than the state average on per pupil financing, and they have a significant difference in the demographics compared to many of the suburban school districts. So they need to be given some fair appreciation for the challenges that they have before you compare apples to apples. So we gave a equity index boost to Tulsa and Oklahoma City. And even with that boost, and even with the fact that they both spend a lot more than the average on per pupil expenditure, they both still ended up at the bottom of the barrel. And in order for our goal to be achieved, which would be Tulsa to be at least at the state average over 5 years, they got a significant amount of work that they need to do. So we need dramatic reform. We're going to track that reform through the rep index. We can track it each year, and we can look at, like I said, at those different attributes, characteristics of success. I mean, and it's basically it's nothing dramatic. It's how did students do in math, science, and English? How was the graduation rate? How was the chronic absentee rate? As I said before, spending, the challenge that they have with regard to their demographics. We'll continue to monitor that over the next several years and see whether or not we can see any progress in the Tulsa school system.
Yeah. Well, Ken, right now. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just going to ask right now, what is that current proficiency level like in Tulsa? Is it like only 20%, 30%? I mean, it's got to be well below 50, well below 50.
It's 89% fail to achieve proficiency. The way that the school, the way that the Oklahoma's, and in fact, this is true throughout most of the United States because of federal law, believe it or not, you got to categorize students in one of four categories: basic, below basic, basic, proficient, and above proficient. Correct. So if you just look at the top two categories, proficient and above proficient, only 11% of Tulsa students achieve that number. 89% in the most recent calculation, 89% don't achieve proficiency, which is pretty dreadful. And so there's a long way to go. There you have on the screen there the rankings in the study we just put out. The one thing I do want to emphasize beyond. Go ahead.
I just, I go through NAEP scores frequently when I'm trying to, write something or do something. And it's so obvious when you look at NAEP scores. This is just a downward trend. I mean, we actually did significantly better years ago. This is literally something new in the last 20 years where it's just, we went on this kind of nosedive trajectory and we're not coming back out of it. I mean, you can look at the figures. We just don't seem to be coming out of it.
Well, there's a lot of, I'm a real fan of Thomas Sowell. And if you look at a lot of what Thomas Sowell has done, he's a master at empiricism, and he has looked at sort of what happened prior to 1965, the civil rights legislation, and what happened after 65, after the civil rights legislation. And you can track a downward spiral of many of the sociological characteristics of strong families, a strong nuclear family, out of wedlock births being astronomical, especially in the Black community. The data now on what happens to the cohort who are born out of wedlock, in terms of prison, in terms of educational attainment, in terms of college, in terms of graduation, is horrific. And so there's clearly two things going on, at least that I can see. One, just a deterioration in the cohesiveness of the family. But then secondly, there has been, frankly, a revolution in our educational schools. And the educational schools now turn out teachers who are not your kindly matron who just cares about students agreeing to become the school teacher. What you have is activists coming out of educational schools and focusing on a lot of things that have very little to do with simply whether a student can master the three R's: reading, writing, and arithmetic. And so we've got reform that has to take.
Yeah, it's exactly the way the commies wanted it to work. We've gone from education to social problems. And I thought it was really interesting about how you said that there are other people, other groups who worry about the social issues. This is something that you guys aren't going to undertake because you want to focus on just the academics. And I think that's what we have to do. And it's interesting to me because I pulled this slide up. This is part of your, where can people find this, by the way, Ken?
It's on the NorthStar website, oknorthstar.org, oknorthstar.org. It's on our website.
Okay, Jenny, so when you get a chance, hit that little plus button to magnify that, just to make it a little bigger on the screen.
Okay, sure. Hold on one second. Tell me when, because I can't see both of them. Is that good?
Yeah, maybe one more.
Is that better?
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
Okay, thank you. All right. So I wanted to point this out, and this is right. oknorthstar.org, right?
Yep.
Okay. These are the per pupil expenditures over the course of the last several years. So as the expenditures have gone up, the academics have gone down. Right? I mean, can
general,
we say that?
That's an accurate statement of the trend. Yeah.
So I homeschooled 4 kids, and it didn't take me $10,137 a kid.
Well,
I'm pretty sure it didn't. I mean,
actually, one of the analytical studies that we've done that I don't think we've made public yet was an interesting piece done by the physicist who joined our group, Jeff Lewin, and he found that there were academic studies that showed that obviously if you spend nothing per pupil, you get nothing, but then the more you spend, up to about $11,000 per pupil in today's dollars, you have an upward trajectory of educational attainment. But that at 11,000, it sort of flattens out. So it really doesn't make a difference whether you spend much of a difference whether you spend 11,000 or 25,000. It's sort of baked in the cake. So we're spending roughly enough in Oklahoma to create a healthy educational environment. So there's got to be something else going on. As you can see, there was a big jump after the teacher strike between 2018 and 2019, where the average was 7,300 versus 8,500. And then it flattens out in the next several years. And then if you look at the bottom, adjusted for inflation, we're spending roughly the same amount, but slightly less each year because of inflation. But the real question, the next question that we're focusing on beyond the rep index is what happens after April 2nd, which is when the election is. If we do get a majority on the board, then we need to start to explore reform options. And we've done a study, which we've not yet released, that looks at reform options that took place in Mississippi, where they put in place what's called the Mississippi Miracle in 2013, and they increased Black proficiency from 49th in the state to 5th in the state, which was pretty dramatic. We looked at New Orleans, which after Hurricane Katrina, they went to a system where they abolished all the public schools and let a bunch of schools become charter schools. Right. And then you look at the Harvard Children's Zone, which is a 20-block experiment that's been going on for 20 years, where they look at a wide variety of community characteristics to be of assistance to students in their educational process, including something as simple as a college, they call it a college, for parents, even of toddlers, so that they start to understand how an enriched home environment can be very important to progress in the early years of school. So you've got that. You've got a dramatic experiment going on down in Houston right now, where the state of Texas took over the school, the Houston school system, and put in place a superintendent who, ex-Marine, who had a lot of experience in both Dallas and Colorado Springs in being a superintendent. And he takes a very aggressive, very harsh approach to the situation. And he's had some results, but he only started last September in Houston. So it'll be 2 or 3 years before we know how much he's been successful down there. But he headed up a consulting firm that was specifically focused on turning around failing urban schools. And that's what we have in Tulsa, is a failing urban school.
Well,
we've analyzed deeply. Dr. Roland Fryer, a Harvard economist. Sorry.
Well, I was just I wanted people to actually see what you've done here, because it's really, I mean, it's when you look at the actual graph, basically, of what you've done. So this is your index ranking for 2023. You know, it's a shame that there are that. I mean, look at Oklahoma City and Tulsa. I mean, and I've been through your paper, and Oklahoma City and Tulsa are at the bottom of every single ranking. I mean, every single one. Did you find, by any stretch of the imagination, when you kind of did an overview, did you find that the larger the school, the poorer the results? Or am I just, inventing, is this fallacy of small sample?
Now, I don't attribute it to size as much as I attribute it to demographics. So if you just take Jenks, for example, up here in the north, if you just take Jenks and you compare it to Oklahoma City and to Tulsa, they have very different demographic profiles. And that difference in demographic profiles, honestly, is going to have an effect on the school system. And again, it's an external variable that the school has no control over virtually.
Sure.
Like I said,
they have to take all the kids in their districts.
To breakdown in the family, right? So I think that, so for example, Union has a fairly similar profile to Tulsa, but they do, I think, better by any assessment than does Tulsa or Oklahoma City. But that's what I think we're going to find as we expand this. We're going to eventually do a Oklahoma City edition where we compare at least 15 school districts into Oklahoma County. Then we're going to expand that over the next 6 months to the top 50 school districts in the state, and we'll be able to deduce a lot more insight into what the correlation is between success and failure. But ultimately, the question is, what do you do when you have a failing school system? And that's what we will need to focus on here in Tulsa.
Well, and it's interesting. I brought this up in conversations before on the podcast. In, I believe it was 2014 or 13, I was at a conference in Missouri, and I ran into a guy, Dr. Stan Hartzler, who was superintendent, I believe, over Oklahoma City for some time. And math was his focus. And so for a period of time, they just really focused on math. And so the kids would come into the classroom, they would take a timed test. So they'd have an addition time test, a subtraction time test, a multiplication and division, and he really, really, really drilled the basics. And just in the small time that he was there, because I think he was only there maybe 4 years or 5 years, just in that time, the scores were coming up rapidly. And it's been my experience as a teacher that what happened in the early 2000s, late 1990s, there was a rash of, you're being mean to my kid. This is too much. They have too much homework. We can't go do our sports. We can't go do we can't just have this homework all the time. It's taking over our lives. And so there was a lot of parent tamping down of the curriculum, and a lot of administrators who were saying, I don't want all these parents in my office all the time, so you need to just lighten up a little bit. And it was kind of from there that this whole thing blossomed into this, we're just not going to make the kids do anything, because then the parents come down and complain, and we don't want to do anything anyway, so this is just a great excuse. And we'll start inserting social issues instead, because they don't seem to complain that much about that. And I really do see, personally, just having been in the classroom, and my mom having been in the classroom, my mom was in the classroom 35 years. She saw it as a trend go from the 70s forward, this kind of, meh, so math, meh, but if we don't turn around and start getting interested in academics again and focusing on the basics, not this Common Core pie in the sky, Mark Tucker, we're not going to make anything in America because we're just going to be thinkers. We have to ship all of our actual doers someplace else so we can just be the land of thinkers. Everybody has to go to college, all of that nonsense. If we don't get back to just basic stuff, it's just going to keep getting worse. There's no way for it to get better. There's not. Nothing from nothing is nothing.
Yeah. The proof that's in the pudding of what you're just saying is, I just looked it up here, a book I've listened to at least 3 times now, Thomas Sowell, Inside American Education. Thomas Sowell, Inside American Education. And he does, again, he's one of my favorites because he's very empirically based. He shows the differences in grade inflation, the differences in the academics training with the proliferation of education schools, as opposed to people getting a math degree and then teaching math. He also makes some very harsh comments about, again, based on empiricism, about where it is that students who go into the education major stack up against other disciplines. And it turns out that they're the lowest of the low. It's an easy place to default to when you're not going to do well in in economics or business or engineering or even sociology or psychology. They'll default into education. So you're not getting as high a quality teacher.
And I can speak to that, because I remember when I was at UCO and I was doing my bachelor's degree in biology, we would have, I ran the biology club for several years, and we would have education majors come over to be in the biology club, and we would ask them, and it always used to make me so irritated. I think by the time I left, I had something like 60 hours or more in science and math. And I think it was even more than that. They had to have 12. 12. What does 12 hours of science teach you? That's a tree. That's some grass. I mean, nothing. So there you are in a classroom teaching biology, and you have no idea anything beyond, the very, very, very most basic elements. And then we want to complain that we don't have good, STEM outcome. Well, because you don't have good STEM teachers. That's why. 12 hours of biology does not a science teacher make you.
So that's part of the problem that we're seeing. But the other thing that, again, in the study that we're going to issue after the election on reform experiences in other school districts is equally look at what has not worked. we have one part of a chapter in there that looks at what every president has done since John F. Kennedy, and every president has had an initiative focused on K through 12, and there is not one of them that moves the needle. Not one of them moves the needle in terms of the NAEP scores. They all are flat or declining. So we know a lot about what doesn't work, and that we tried a lot of different things: class size, teacher pay, various types of promoting more aggressive tutoring. So we have to focus on what hasn't worked and stop trying to do what hasn't worked. And then secondly, we got to focus on what has worked. Again, in that regard, I'm a big fan of what Dr. Roland Fry up at Harvard has done. He has tried a massive amount of educational experiments to see what actually moves the needle. And he's got 5, I'm not going to remember them off the top of my head, but he says 5 characteristics of successful schools. And if you can start to incorporate those 5 successful characteristics, you move the needle. And that's what
would one of them be discipline?
On the reform characteristic. Yes. It's not discipline per se, but the characteristics do play to the fact that you need more intensive supervision of students. I don't think he gets into specifically the debate over whether or not there's discrimination in school discipline simply because there's disproportionate impact on minorities. I don't think he gets into that debate. I don't remember. But yeah, I mean, you raise what is maybe the key question. 45, just to look at discipline, one way of looking at discipline, 45% after COVID, 45% of high schoolers were chronically absent, which means more than 10 absences in a semester. I don't know how you can get a quality education if that larger percentage of your students are chronically absent. So a lot of work to do. I enjoy doing think tank work, and after the election we're going to hunker down, figure out what we learned from the election here in Tulsa, and try to improve the quality of our thinking at NorthStar, and then be a factor over the next 10 years. I figure I may have 10 years in me. Over the next 10 years, trying to improve quality of K through 12 education.
Well, I was very impressed actually by your first piece of research. I looked through that. That was pretty well. I mean, that was very well done. I mean, it was certainly to me on par with something that, a national think tank would put out. I mean, I was pretty impressed. Here's my concern or the question.
Yeah, go ahead. I was just going to say I'm smarter than I look, so that's probably why.
You do this great research. You put it out there. I think, because I was going to say right now, if you produce this for the school board or the superintendent at TPS, for example, I think you're going to get maybe a yawn. Am I wrong? I guess the whole point, and I know we've got a delay, so I'm going to kind of get this out so you can address both things. I'm assuming that the whole idea behind getting people in to school board seats is getting people into school board seats who are going to be interested in actually creating an environment in which kids can learn actual facts and not just some kind of, illegitimate, bizarre social crap. So right now, unless you get these seats flipped over, all of this effort that you're doing, where does it go?
Well, for one thing, we are not a political organization. We're nonpartisan, so we welcome Democrats, independents, and Republicans. It should not be a partisan and political issue of wanting good education for the amount that we spend on students in Oklahoma. We will continue to build coalitions in favor of quality education. It will, to give you a little bit of insight, our goal, NorthStar's goal, stated goal for Oklahoma is for Oklahoma to rank in the top half of the states 10 years from now. So that would require a very, very deliberate building block approach to improving school districts, because there's no way Oklahoma is going to improve if the school districts don't improve. So we're in it for the long haul. We hope that we have a big success here in Tulsa by focusing on the 3 elections that are coming up, but we'll take account of the outcome of those elections. We'll do a debrief, an autopsy on what we did over the last year, what worked, what didn't work. We're finding out that it's very, very hard to organize. There's even data out there about differences in attitudes in organizing for social benefit between Democrats and Republicans. Democrats as collectivists are more comfortable with joining organizations, Republicans being a little bit more
Individualistic.
It's more like herding cats. Yeah, individualistic. So there's a lot. We're a new organization. Most of us are retired, so we've got nothing better to do than to try to do some good for Oklahoma. We got a lot to learn, but I think that we'll make some progress over the next 5 years, I hope.
Well, Ken, a question I have, in today's society, and I mean, obviously computers, technology, AI is coming in. Obviously we have been going downhill for a long time. There's no doubt about that. But the acceleration, I think, at this point with technology, literally can replace thought in a lot of these things. I mean, how practical do you think that these kids are actually going to want to learn and want to do things when they can just dictate right into their iPad, and do things like, because these devices are put into the classrooms. They don't necessarily even have to type anymore or spell or anything. I mean, it just seems like it's such an obstacle that's only going to just snowball. I just don't know how we deal with combating, actual critical thinking with the advent of this massive technology that's just on the precipice.
Well, so we're real good right now, meaning NorthStar, at spotting failure. Where we're not very good right now is in understanding in a very deep way why. Why are these institutions failing? There's a lot of literature out there about generic, broad-based insights into especially urban school districts. But then you got to figure out why they're failing, and then you got to figure out what the reform plan is that you're going to put in place. I honestly don't know the link between the advent of various kinds of digital technology and the success or failure of schools. I honestly haven't read a good study that says, this is why we're failing because of technology. I think technology is just a tool right now, and if I had to make a guess, we better learn to live with it as opposed to resisting learning from it. But like I said, I don't think we know right now the degree to which that's going to be an obstacle to reform and to success of K through 12.
Yeah, well, and I want to just make another point off your numbers. that you had. Let's just take the average, let's say $10,000 per child is being spent, in these classrooms. And even if we go super conservative, like a 15 child classroom, which that is probably very rare. I mean, it's probably upwards of 25 to 30 in most of these classrooms. But just to make it the math easy, you've got 15 kids in a classroom. That's $150,000 per classroom. You've got a teacher making $50,000. Like, in your opinion, like your organization, where's that other $100,000 going? Even in a small classroom like that, like where do you think that's actually being spent?
Well, one of the initiatives we have underway is to try to rip apart the Tulsa budget, Tulsa school system budget, and get to the bottom of where the money goes. I'll express my disappointment that it's not as easy as you think it should be. And the reason, whenever something's really hard to do when it comes to understanding what government's doing, you can pretty much assume that they don't want you to understand it.
Correct.
So if it's hard to figure out where that money's going and what the correlation is between the expenditure and student success, we haven't mastered that yet. We have a guy, a very bright guy, Brent Martin, who's an entrepreneur who's way better with numbers and Excel spreadsheets and the like. And he's been really making yeoman's effort to try to dig into that. But we don't have any conclusions yet that help us understand what needs to be done. Like I said, after the election, we need to focus not on getting the right board members. We need to then focus on working with whatever board members we have and seeing what their stomach is for dramatically influencing the budget process and, frankly, the superintendent process. I will say that when Deborah Gist was forced into a resignation rather dramatically this past 6 months. I was hoping for a national search that would bring in somebody who had a tremendous amount of experience in turning around an urban school district. The board, in a split vote, opted not to do that. They took somebody from within the Tulsa school system. I have no a priori assessment of Dr. Johnson. She's very credentialed, she's very experienced, and she knows the Tulsa school system very well. But it is also the case that she's had a very high administrative position for quite a few years. And during those years, there has been no dramatic change in the competency of Tulsa students. So I wonder whether she's the right pick for the job. I don't know what the next board will do, whether or not they will continue to hope that Dr. Johnson, in coordination with the oversight by the Oklahoma Department of Education, Tulsa's under quite a bit of scrutiny. They have to report monthly on progress. One can hope that the fact that there's a lot of attention being paid to what's going on in Tulsa school system will allow them to clean up their embezzlement situation, clean up their illicit advances that a private foundation has given to teachers and administrators in the Tulsa school system without the knowledge of the school board. There's an awful lot of cleaning up that needs to be done, and I hope that Superintendent Johnson will work with us to implement some of the ideas that we'll undoubtedly have over the next several months.
Well, I think too, one of the important things to do, I really like the fact that there are a number of you working on this. And I think getting the community involved and making sure that the community knows what you're doing and that the community can help press this change, it's really the only way to do it. I mean, when I was talking last night, as a matter of fact, about election issues and dark money, if we don't start standing up and pushing back. And I, you know, obviously I'm not talking violence or anything else like that, but I'm talking about being very vocal. I'm talking about not sitting down and shutting up. I'm talking about, you know, no, I pay taxes to this particular district, I will be heard, that kind of thing. I don't think until you get groups of people who are willing to stand up against the nonsense that goes on, and I'll call it unchecked nonsense, because people don't have time to look into this like you guys are doing. And I would hope that parents would pay significant attention to what you were doing, because this just gives, this kind of thing that you're doing gives them the impetus to be able to go to the school board meetings and say, stop, we're, you know, we want this, and argue for change, and be that disruptor of the system. But boy, you got to get people to buy in.
Well, actually, if I can take a moment to talk about another initiative that I've been heavily involved in this year with Charles DeFuria in the Luther school system. Oklahoma's Constitution is very clear in Article 10, Section 26, that a school district cannot spend more than 10% of the assessed value of the property within the school district. And Charles took it upon himself, as a former member of the Luther school board, to find out whether or not Luther was complying with that 10% requirement. It led to a suit that is right now in the Oklahoma County District Court, and we are working on trying to get the data to determine whether or not they're in violation of that 10%. Now, I bring that up not because it's fun, not because it's exciting,
but
because of how tedious it is to try to get the information that allows a citizen to just make a judgment. Are you obeying the Constitution or not? We've been at this since last August, and we still don't have the data from Luther that we need in order to make a clear assessment of whether or not there's a violation of Section 26. That convinces me, again, just like with the Tulsa school system budget. If they make it hard for you to understand it, it's because if you did understand it, you wouldn't like what they're doing, and you would then push back. Charles has engaged in a one-man operation to try to do this. And we need people like that who would be willing to stand up, people like the people involved in NorthStar who largely in retirement are willing to stand up. We have nothing to lose. I mean, like you said earlier in the conversation, you're at a point in your life. I'm at a point in my life where I don't have to care very much what people think of me. And so I can go out there and not worry about risking a career and try to do some positive change. But it's going to take a lot of hard work. And all I can say is, but for the grace of God, we have a group of people with NorthStar that I'm just amazed at the willingness to put in effort to try to figure out what we can do for Tulsa Public School. When you and I talked maybe almost 2 years ago, Jenny, about the concept of developing a NorthStar and the idea of trying to put together some sort of a think tank that would assess what's going on in Oklahoma in K through 12, largely building on your opposition to Common Core. We finally did get it off the ground, and we've been joined by quite a few people. And I think that as we grow through demonstrating our sincerity and the analytical approach that we take to the problem, as opposed to just sort of complaining,
Sure.
we'll make more progress in digging into what it is that's going wrong in these governmental institutions, and hopefully through that get corrective action taking place. But it's hard. It's hard work. It's not fun work.
Well, and I think that's why people
As you
don't
well
do
know.
it. Yeah. And I think that's why people don't do it. I mean, they have other things that they need to do in families and family lives. And I think a lot of it is, like you said, they don't understand it. And kind of going back a second to what our friend Charles has done with the Luther School District. He was in a position as a CPA to understand the numbers, but that doesn't necessarily mean something. Any parent should be able to go and ask for the numbers and sit down and think about them. But the further we get away from academics and education and the more into social issues, the less people understand the basic things, and the less people feel encumbered by a need to make sure that their tax dollars are being spent appropriately, or that people are following the Constitution, or that fill in the blank. We're more interested in what the score is on the football game, or whatever. But I do think it's important to reiterate that this one man has taken on this school board and found that what they're doing is unconstitutional. And you've been gracious enough to help him, because he actually took it to court on his own. I mean, just did it by himself, represented himself.
Yep.
And I think people don't understand that you can do that. Now, he got a judge in the Oklahoma County District Court that was actually pretty friendly to that and said, hey, this isn't normally done. I'm not kind of sure how to deal with you, but I can tell you, you need to do blah, 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 blah. So Judge Andrews gave him, instead of just saying, get out of my courtroom, you need an attorney. He understood that we can represent ourselves. We should represent ourselves when we can. Absolutely. And instead of tossing him out, he said, okay, look, here's what you need to do. Go make sure these things are done, and then we'll see you again in court. So people, don't be afraid to take these things on yourself. They're your tax dollars. And don't think you're not smart enough. You're smart enough to find people who can help you, even if you're smart enough to say, oh, I can't sit there and look through all those spreadsheets and know what I'm looking at. Okay, but you're smart enough to find somebody who can help you and ask around to find out who the people are that can help you. So, wouldn't you say, Ken, that part of the basis of you founding NorthStar and doing what you're doing is that one man can do something, and one man can begin to do something and drag other men along with them?
Yeah, that's good. A very interesting point at a number of levels. For one thing, when I went down to federal government in 1981 in the Reagan administration, I had become I converted from very left wing orientation. I grew up in the city of New York. I don't think I ever met a Republican before I went to law school. So it took Milton Friedman and then teaching a course in federal regulation as a law professor that helped me understand the dynamics a lot better. So when I went down to government in 81, it was with a singular vision that we needed radical reform in natural gas regulation. Now, I realize that's not everyone's cup of tea, but it was my cup of tea, and it was very clear that Reagan believed that. We had just come through the Carter administration with all of its setbacks in energy. And it took 12 years, and I'm not going to say I did it single-handedly. It's all I did for 12 years, but there were a lot of other people along the way that were part of the process. But yeah, I can honestly say that today's natural gas industry is a product of 12 years of work that I did, and I made a difference. So yes, one person can make a difference. And let me contrast that in a second way to respond to what you're saying with another observation. I'm going to be a little bit arrogant here for a second, so I apologize for my East Coast
you are
ways.
a New Yorker.
I am. I'm a New York Irish New Yorker. If that's not arrogant, I don't know what is. But Maria's experience with legal overwatch, my experience with the Tulsa school board policies, and Charles's experience with the Luther School District trying to unravel the Section 26. The common element in all of those was shocking to Maria and I. We're both lawyers whose careers were largely on the East Coast in a very, what would you call it? A very sort of environment in which people really cared and needed to care about following the law. Okay. We come out to retirement here to Oklahoma, and we're not exactly sure what's going on. But the one thing we do know is that we can make a dramatic statement that, for the most part, many of the people with power in Oklahoma have never been called on the carpet to account for their behavior. And so many times we find that there's no rule of law commitment in all of the institutions we come up against in Oklahoma. And we're not sure why that is. Oklahoma is a red state. You would think we're a pretty conservative state. We ought to cherish the rule of law. But the fact of the matter is, we do not challenge our public officials sufficiently with enough research, analysis, and leadership to get them to do their jobs well. Maria's overwhelmed with the responsibility of legal overwatch. We simply can't believe the degree to which administrators in the public school system all over the state don't follow IEP regulations, don't follow bullying regulations, don't follow the transfer rules. It's depressing to just think that we're going to have to figure out a way to get public officials to acknowledge that they have accountability to the citizens, and then to change their ways and become more responsive to citizen concerns. So on the East Coast, we didn't find that. It was overly litigious on the East Coast, I would say. They challenged everything. You had parents in Fairfax school system, where my kids went to school, where probably half of the students' parents were lawyers, and so everything was under a microscope and very much willing to be challenged. But here in Oklahoma, you just don't have that culture. It's a cultural difference between my perception of what goes on in the East Coast versus what goes on in Oklahoma. There's much more acceptance of whatever the public officials are feeding us at any moment. And one of my favorite stories is the mushroom theory. Keep them in the dark and feed them crap. That's the way we're being treated as citizens here in Oklahoma. We're not getting the responsiveness from our public officials that we need. We'll do our small part, but frankly, you're doing your small part. We need hundreds of other people doing their small part. I'm gratified, actually, to see groups that have come into existence over just the time that I've been in Oklahoma. I think there is a movement. I think it's influenced by Trump, to be honest with you, of people willing to take on the system. So there are more organizations every month that are focused. What they need is leadership. Frankly, what we need is resources. I know that you need resources. I know that Legal Overwatch needs resources, and I know that NorthStar needs resources. So even if you can't provide the leadership in terms of the substance, you can provide some of the resources and support that these organizations need in order to be successful.
Excellent point.
Fantastic.
Excellent point. Well, Ken, thank you so much for being with us today, and do keep us up on what you're doing. But I mean, it sounds to me like you guys have a great head start, and when you've got another study that comes out, let us know, and we'll be happy to talk about that as well, because I see you. We were the only organization when we started in 2008. We were the only organization in Oklahoma that was interested in the taxpayer side of public education. And then it kind of grew beyond that, because we just wanted to know why all of our tax dollars were going into this black hole that wasn't producing anything out the other side. And that was where we started. And so for years, we've been the only organization that's even been interested in public education, other than those who, like you said, just want to perpetuate the status quo. And we need to be done with the status quo, because it simply isn't working, and we're ready to move on, blow up the system and start over, because it's what's going on now. The trajectory is continued downward, and we've got to have something to move the needle upward. So thank you for doing what you're doing, and all of the people that are involved in your organization.
Let me make one closing point on that.
Sure.
One of the, again, I'm somewhat of an academic, and I apologize for that in advance. But a guy named Demsetz, Demtz, I think it was, he came up with a theory in economics called capture theory. And what capture theory basically says is the people who have the most to lose in a situation have the greatest incentive to spend resources in order to capture the organization that is supposed to have the greatest impact on their lives. So it's very understandable that teachers and school boards and contractors all have captured, to a very, very large extent, the administrative power structure that's going to influence education. Milton Friedman said in the Iron Triangle that that there's a battle between concentrated power that has a lot to lose and diffuse power, each of which has a little to lose. So you take all the parents in combination, they have a lot to lose, but they're spread out all over the place. Right. Whereas you look at the concentration of teachers, administrators, and contractors, and they have a lot to lose, but they're concentrated and are willing to spend more to capture the reins of power of the institutions that are so fundamental. So that is, at least helps me understand the kind of battle we're up against. Is we need to sort of figure out a way to break up that capture that has taken place between the entrenched interests and the diffuse interests of the majority. That's my end of my lecture.
Well, but no, you're exactly right, because that's what we're finding in Luther school districts too. And you know, your wife, we have talked about that numerous times, even on this program, the fact that as taxpayers, we can sue a school district who will then turn around and employ 2 or 3 taxpayer paid attorneys to fight the taxpayer parent. You know, and I think that's probably number one on the scale that you just mentioned. It's just absolutely ludicrous. And then on the other side, you have these contractors who make money, who make bank off of building stuff for schools. And so they're right there trying to get the school bond passed because it benefits them to get it. It's just exactly what you said. It's just a knot of entrenched interest that we've got to somehow untangle and get them, because you have state agencies who have to provide a service for the least amount possible. So they'll go out and take bids on these things. Public schools don't do that. And even if they do take bids, you know, who's to say which was the best one in the end? Because you may not even see all the bids because they're sealed. It's nonsense. And I agree with you. And I won't go on because we're already at 119. But just to reiterate on what you said. Yeah.
Yeah.
Precisely. Well, Ken, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. And yes, I have a tremendous amount of respect for the work that you do, Jenny. And it's an inspiration to me. And it helped me have the courage to push forward when I had the vision to create NorthStar with a couple of other fellas. So hopefully we'll follow in your footsteps.
Well, if that's the case, that was all a God thing. So, I mean, he just made me tough enough, I guess, to get out there. Who knows? But wasn't just me. Ken, thank you so much for being with us. Keep in touch, and we will talk to you hopefully next time you get it. Your next, the next thing that comes out, let us know.
I will. Thank you.
All right,
Thanks,
Ken.
Ken.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye. That is what he's done is just phenomenal, and it should be a blueprint for every parent. And so many retired people, you see them at all these meetings, and if you could just get a big group of retired people to get together like Ken has done and take on these things, he's
well, and just from his own background and the whole think tank, and he's laying out, like you said, a blueprint here. I think that's fantastic. But look at how he's already nailed so many points of the real problem, especially that concentration problem. I mean, that is the real issue. Is you've got just a handful. It's only a handful of organizations alongside the administrators, whether they're contractors or these boards or, whatever these organizations are, they control the entire education system here in Oklahoma. And really, Jenny, you think about it, where's the State Department of Education? Where are, the people that's supposed to be, you've got a school like TPS that's at 11% proficiency. How are they even allowed to operate? I mean, think about it. How are they even allowed to operate as a school? I mean, it is so, and really, how many of those parents even know how bad those statistics are? I mean, they have no idea. They have absolutely no idea. I know.
Well, they don't, because they believe the propaganda that the school puts out.
Yeah. Well, and all the schools say we're the best school. We're so great, this and that. And parents just say, yeah, but it's kind of a double-edged sword. You've got parents in this time that just aren't as engaged, like they were 20 or 30 years ago, where they're so much more busy. They have so many other things. I don't want to say they're more selfish or anything, but there's a lot of that in there now where parents, they need their time. They're doing their stuff. It's not just 100% to the kids, but I'll tell you what, they've done something that's, I think, absolutely fantastic. And I hope they just blow TPS wide open, because that is like a pit of hell up there. I mean, it really is.
Well, I think, Oklahoma City Public Schools is kind of a similar thing. I just, think that these great big metropolitan schools are the ones that tend to be the worst. And I do agree with Ken that, some of it is the demographic that's there. In Oklahoma City, for example, the Hispanic population is out of control. And there are so many illegals that are in the Oklahoma City public school system who cannot speak a word of English. You can't possibly expect a teacher to stop everything they're doing to translate in Spanish. It just takes too much away from the rest of the kids in the classroom. And it's all nonsense. We shouldn't be educating illegal aliens in the first place, or giving them health care or anything else. We shouldn't.
Yeah. Well, I think the real, that real issue is, and I hope they just blow it wide open and expose it, probably at a minimum 2/3, probably upwards almost to 80% of that classroom money, per pupil money in the classroom, is not being applied in the classroom.
No. And I was going to mention to Ken, but it was so hard because we were kind of on a delay there. But I was going to mention to Ken that just recent studies even have shown that the more money that goes into the system, the more administrators are hired. So you have all of these, now you have these paraprofessionals that we're paying tax dollars for, because they have to take care of the kids for this. It's simple nonsense.
Well, I think it goes back to something that you and Rope and, a lot of people have probably always identified. Just because you add more money into that system doesn't mean you're going to get any kind of result in any capacity. In fact, like what Ken said, kind of at that $11,000 level, you start going in the other direction. You're spending even more money, and you're getting even worse results.
Yeah.
I mean, nothing in real life, in real competition, in just a real kind of decentralized market economy, nothing about the way that the school system operates here in Oklahoma makes any sense. You're rewarding that failure, literally, is what's happening.
Yeah.
Nowhere
Well,
else can you do that kind of stuff and be rewarded in business.
And I thought it was really interesting, just in closing, what he said about he's finding that we don't challenge anything here in Oklahoma. I thought that was absolutely fascinating because how many times have you found the same thing?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, and look what happened to me when I challenged the Oklahoma State Election Board.
Yeah.
They'll just toss you out.
Yeah, you can't challenge the system here.
No, you just can't. So, and that being, wait, let's back up because I don't want people to say you can't challenge.
You can. I was thinking that too. You can.
That I'm still going to challenge the system. I will still scream and yell at you. I will still show up at your meetings and tell you whatever. I mean, I will still do research that shows whatever. I mean, no, we never stop, but it frustrates me that we just don't. I mean, parents don't say, well, wait a minute, what are you doing to this? You know, what is this assignment that my kid is doing? Why can't I see my assignment that it's on computer? Why? And nobody's challenging. Parents rarely challenge what the school does. People rarely say, you know, well, why is it that I have to pay property taxes? Maybe we ought to challenge that, because that's another thing that's just irritated me. You've got a bunch of Republicans up there talking about how they, you know, stopped grocery tax. And I'm like, because that was important, but you didn't touch property tax, did you?
Yeah. Well, to just say that in a little different way, the current system for, I'm going to call the other side the administration side, the administrators. That system is manageable right now. It's very manageable because you only have one or two or a very small select few challenging that system. So it's manageable for them. But you get just a little bit more. The cards are, you know, stacked against us. But if we can get just a little more momentum, a little more people, it's not manageable anymore. Then they can't just brush us to the side and say, you know, whatever. So it's only just an aspect of, we just need a little more from our side. We just need a little more challenge. We need just a couple more people to just start tipping that scale in the other direction.
No, that is an excellent point. I mean, well said, Michael. That is an excellent point. So let's end on that. So next week we have coming up on Wednesday, I was thinking about maybe shifting. We were going to talk about dirty books again, but the program that I did last night for the Lion's Den, I think would be a really great thing to get on video. So we might want to change that and then do the dark money election interference piece on next Wednesday. Yeah. And then Friday, Jana Stanforth is going to be with us, and she's going to talk about some of the surveys that Moms for Liberty have uncovered. Of course, Rope's uncovered surveys for years and have been talking about that, but there's even a new one out that's really disgusting. And if you don't think that it influences people to just simply ask them a question, you're wrong. Yeah. You're completely wrong. That's why push polls work in Oklahoma in elections. And we'll talk about that next Wednesday too. So, Michael, anything exciting coming up for you this weekend?
No, I've got, I have 5 kids, and 3 of my boys are all born within 1 day of each other. I had one yesterday, my 13-year-old on the 21st, and I have actually, believe it or not, I have 2 boys that share birthday today.
So I was going to say something because I know my sister is the 28th of December and I'm the 29th of December. So we have a similar situation here. And my sister and I, because we're the beneficiaries of divorced parents, we used to say that our parents could only stand each other one time a year.
I get a lot of that.
I'm sorry, but that does make me kind of giggle a little bit.
Yeah, it's funny.
So you're doing 2 birthdays today.
No, 3. Well,
Kate had his yesterday.
No, this weekend we're going to do all of them together in a big party. I mean, we celebrated yesterday. my 13-year-old. Then we're going to celebrate the other 2 today. But then this weekend, we'll do a big family party and everything for all of them.
That's nice. Well, I have a big family party coming up on Sunday as well. My dad will be 90 years old.
Wow.
So we will be celebrating my dad on Sunday. His birthday is the 25th, and we're going to celebrate him on Sunday, and he will be 90 years old.
Wow.
And man, the guy's still cooking. I mean, he was a professor at OU in his 80s. So I'm hoping I got those genes. That's what I'm hoping.
Yeah.
So we'll see. All right, Michael, it was good to see you, and
Yes,
we will
ma'am.
see you again next Wednesday. And thanks to everybody who was at the Lion's Den last night. Really enjoyed being there. And thank you to Rhonda Peterson for having me. And we will see you again next Wednesday. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks, everybody.